Hey Pokemon Masters! My name is PokePatrol and hey, welcome. Thank you for clicking on my video. Every time you watch one of my videos, it helps more people find it, so thank you very much. You know, some people like to think of me as a little bit of a Pokemon professor, and by some people, I mean me. I'm gonna be ashamed to say it, I'm not a real scientist, okay? I'm not a real scientist, and if you asked me to think of a scientist, I would probably say Professor Oak, because let's face it, he's the main one I know. Professor Oak is the wisest of the wise when it comes to Pokemon. He knows everything about everything. And in fact, his character is so well fleshed out between the movies, the animated series, the video games, and of course the manga, that we actually know as much about Professor Oak as we do about, say, Ash Ketchum. We know so much about him, and the reason that we're talking about him today is because today's video has been sponsored by Pokemon Masters with their new Professor Oak and Mew event. And that's right, you heard right. Professor Oak and Mew. They're a sync pair in Pokemon Masters. It's the first time ever you can play as Professor Oak in any Pokemon game, and this video is all about deep diving and finding out why they chose Professor Oak with Mew, in my opinion. Oh, and Pokemon Masters, of course, again, today's sponsor. For those of you who don't know, it's a 3-on-3 Pokemon battling adventure. There's a story mode, there's co-op modes, there's ways that you can train yourself. There are some real challenges in there when it comes to legendary Pokemon, and Mew is the first mythical. It's just been introduced with Professor Oak as its sync pair partner, and they're free right now. I mean, the game's free. You can use the link at the top of the description to go to the Google Play, Apple Store. You can download the game today. It's all completely free, and if you're playing it right now, then you get Professor Oak and Mew as part of a special celebration, which I recommend you go and do, because every time that you get a trainer and their sync pair partner, you get these little kind of sync pair stories where you can learn more about the characters. I've learned stuff about Professor Oak through Agatha, for example, in Pokemon Masters, and I've done videos theorizing about that stuff, and you can learn more about Oak and Mew there. And thank you so much to DNA and Pokemon Masters for sponsoring this video, for sponsoring this channel, and letting me finally talk about Professor Oak. Not that I couldn't talk about Professor Oak before, but I've been compiling notes on Professor Oak for such a long time. Like I say, he is so well fleshed out between all the different mediums, and I honestly didn't know what I was going to do with all these research notes. I actually considered writing a bit of fan fiction, like kind of detailing what I guess his life would have been like. Because, like I say, in the movies, we've seen him as a young Professor Oak, as Sammy Oak, meeting another mythical Pokemon, Celebi. We've seen that in the Pokemon movie Forever. We know about how he knows Professor Kurt. We know about how he knows all the other Pokemon professors and his role within Pallet Town. There's so much there, so I'm going to break it all down and then talk about why I think Oak and Mew make sense. So yeah, I guess let's start with the youngest age of Professor Oak. In the Pokemon movie Forever, we see Oak as a young child, Samuel Oak, traveling around the Johto region. So immediately that's pretty interesting, because he's not in Kanto, he's in Johto. He was a world explorer, much like Ash Ketchum, there with a Charmeleon, possibly his starter Pokemon from Pallet Town, where he came from, which means Pallet Town has been giving out those starter Pokemon for a long time. His Pokeballs look very different to those in his future, because using the power of Celebi, he traveled forward in time. He met a young Ash Ketchum, so he knew that Ash Ketchum was going to be born 40 years before it happened. He got to see modern day Pokeballs, he got to see a modern day Pokedex, and actually he is the inventor of the Pokedex, likely as part of a paradox of seeing the Pokedex in the future and then creating it. And possibly the same thing happened here with the Pokeball, because Professor Oak knows the creator of the modern day Pokeball, Kurt. Kurt and Oak are friends, and actually again in the animated series, Oak sends Ash with the GS ball, a very special Pokeball, to see Kurt, to see if he can open it. My suspicion is that the GS ball may well be a prototype designed by Professor Oak from when he saw what a modern day Pokeball looked like in the future, but that is completely my speculation and not official. We also know that when Oak was a kid, I mean, you can actually, when you go into Kurt's house in Heart Gold Soul Silver, you see a picture of Kurt, Oak, and one other person. I suspect that person might be Professor Ivy, who also appears in the animated series, another professor, who actually gave Ash the GS ball, so that's possible. However, Oak knew lots of people when he was younger. In the manga, we learned that he knew the daycare breeding couple. In the games, we learn he's an associate of Mr. Pokemon, the guy who gives you the Togepi egg to take to Professor Elm. He, of course, knows Professor Elm. He actually trained Professor Elm and studied under Professor Rowan. I'll get back to that. And like I mentioned earlier, he knows Agatha Agatha, and based on Agatha's story within Pokemon Masters, you can kind of infer that they were part of the same study group and that she was quite reserved and quiet until she met Oak, who was kind of a bit of an extrovert, always talking about Pokemon and fiddling with his Pokedex and being enthusiastic and being a great battler, because he was a great battler. In fact, we know for a fact he's won at least one Pokemon League, possibly the first Pokemon League, and that maybe she kind of had a bit of a thing for him that wasn't reciprocated because his head was in Pokemon, and so he wasn't really thinking about that sort of stuff. Again, this is all kind of a little bit more speculation based on what's in Pokemon Masters. We learn that Agatha was learning to be a professor through another Pokemon Masters clip that we find with the character of Chris. So again, there's so much information in that game that you wouldn't otherwise pick up on. But it turns out all of that information is canon. That's come from the manga, where we learned that actually Agatha and Oak were part of the same study group, possibly at Celadon University, the university that all Pokemon professors seem to have gone to. Oak also has relatives. He has Samson Oak, who is his cousin in Alola. He has, according to the manga, two brothers, one of whom is the postmaster of Pallet Town, the other who is the mayor. So the Oak family are a pretty big deal in Pallet Town. And Professor Oak's grandfather was supposedly the first person who kind of brought notoriety to the Oak family and to Pallet Town, which maybe he was the first person to run Oak's lab. Oh, Oak also has grandkids, blue/green, depending on your country, or Gary, if you're talking about the animated series, and of course Daisy Oak. These are his grandkids. We also know, like I said earlier, that he studied under Professor Rowan in Sinnoh. Things like this can be seen on the Pokemon card Oak's Visit. Oak goes back and forth from the Sinnoh region. In fact, he has a house in Eterna City, which makes sense because it's right next to Eterna Forest, where you can find Rotom, a Pokemon that in the animated series he has a particular obsession with. He's also known for giving out Pokemon like Charmander, Bulbasaur, Squirtle, Eevee, and Pikachu. He's also been seen in the animated series using a Pidgey or a Dragonite. And in Pokemon Red, Blue, and Yellow, in the code, there is actually a hidden battle with Professor Oak. It wasn't accessible in the game, but if you use glitches, you can find a battle where he uses the starter Pokemon's final evolution that you left behind in the lab, a Tauros, a Gyarados, an Arcanine, an Exeggutor, and that's it. I thought there was a sixth Pokemon. Maybe the sixth Pokemon was meant to be Mew. The only other things that I can think to note here is on the side of all of that, and all of the Pokemon research that he does, studying the interpersonal relationships between people and Pokemon, and being the world's #1 leading expert on Pokemon, who created the Pokedex and is a wonderful sketch artist, as we see in the Pokemon movie Forever. He's also really into Pokemon haikus and making haikus that have Pokemon rhyming schemes. We see this a lot in the Johto series and in the Pokemon Chronicle series. And he has his own radio program in Goldenrod City with the DJ Mary. Right, I think that's enough about Professor Oak. Yes, I think there is a book there, I think there is a story there, I think there is a game there chronicling all of his adventures. But what about this other part? What about this missing part? Mew. How does Mew tie into the story of Oak? Well, I didn't realize this until I really started looking into it for this video, but there is a place in the Kanto region that Mew lives. It's Pallet Town. In the Pokemon Adventures manga, Mew is first seen in the kind of the forests and fields around Pallet Town. In the episode of the Sun and Moon arc Alola Kanto, we see Mew, again, in the outskirts of Pallet Town. In the new Sword and Shield series, Go encounters Mew just outside of Pallet Town, just in the outskirts around Pallet Town, and in fact, Cinnabar Mansion in the games, where they took Mew's DNA and turned it into Mewtwo, it is just south of Pallet Town. And in the Pokemon animated series and movies, the first movie is placed chronologically between the final gym and the Pokemon League. Ash spends a lot of his time in Pallet Town, and actually that's very likely where the events of the movie start kicking off. Which means New Island, the lab where Mewtwo was created, again, it's probably just south of Pallet Town on the Kanto coast. And Mew shows up there, it's hardly a world away. And in fact, one more I had completely forgotten about. In Pokemon Origins, when the series comes to a close and it's the final shot and Red's like, I need to go find the other Pokemon that I'm missing, which is Mew, Mew appears at the window just outside of Professor Oak's lab. That is the Alola series, the Sword and Shield series, the Pokemon Adventures manga, the original series, the games, and the Pokemon Origins as well. I think that's enough. Mew lives primarily, yes, there's other Mew in the Pokemon world, but Lucario in the Mystery Mew movie that's set in the Sinnoh region, and Mew can be transferred to the game and is actually one of the few native legendaries in the Pokemon Sword and Shield code, and I'm going to talk about that soon. But there is a Mew, probably the same Mew across all of these different mediums that we're seeing, that lives around Pallet Town. Why? Why does Mew live there? Well, I can't be certain, but maybe it's because the big secret that we don't know about Oak yet, that we have been led to believe and should believe now, is that Professor Oak's sidekick Pokemon is Mew, and he's one of those few people who have seen it. And that would make sense, because otherwise how would Mew even have a Pokedex entry? And why would that Pokedex entry, number 151, be after Mewtwo? It's because the Pokedex was being filled out and filled in and written by his grandson, and by Red, or Ash, or whoever you want it to be, depending on whatever medium you're working with. And they went out into the Pokemon world, they filled up the Pokedex, and then they brought the Pokedex back to Oak, and Oak was like, I actually know about one other, because it's his friend. And now his sync pair partner. So I'm looking forward to finding out even more about Mew and Oak in this story in Pokemon Masters. They are free right now, and again, thank you to DNA. Thank you to Pokemon Masters for sponsoring this video, for sponsoring this channel, for letting me kind of just ramble on about Oak and Mew for a bit. It's fascinating, and I hadn't even considered the fact that the two characters might be related, but actually, for Oak's massive history, it makes a lot of sense that he would have befriended a mythical Pokemon, or two, if you include Celebi. So that's just my thoughts right now. Let me know yours in the comments below. Every time you leave a like, leave a comment, it helps other people find this channel. I'll be back with more Pokemon theories very, very soon. I have another one about Mew and the Galar region coming, yeah, you'll see. Thank you to DNA for sponsoring this video. Do check out that link at the top of the description, and of course, so hi Pokemon Masters.
This is Ash Ketchum. You just watched a video by Birdkeeper Toby. That makes you a Pokemon Master.
And a massive thank you to those of you supporting me on Patreon, including the big patrons of the month, the Nerd Therapist and Gunnar Clovis. Thank you.